Welcome everyone to this series on Saturn. We all, are pretty familiar with Saturn, so it's widely used in astrology. There's so much, existing literature. And so what is there more to learn? Well, there's always another layer, another perspective. And what I hope to be able to do and giving ourselves enough time is to really explore the different layers of this archetype, but also understand it in every house and sign. And of course, use examples to demonstrate how it works. So, this is the first session out of 5 sessions. Now, the interesting thing is, in astrology, we tend to see Saturn as this very austere and commanding presence, and sometimes intimidating presence, sometimes restrictive. We are now experiencing how Saturn in Capricorn, before it moved into Aquarius, is leading to all these restrictions. Saturn in Capricorn, confines us at home, and we can't move. We're not free to do whatever we want. But there's a higher reason. We are trying to save the world from contamination, and so there's this sense of personal sacrifice where we limit our freedom in order to serve society and something larger than ourselves. So that's very Saturnian, and it feels like our self is always compromised with Saturn. There's always a greater need or greater reason. But the truth is, if we look again at the mythology, Saturn was ruling during the time that is called the Golden Age. And that was a time of civilization where people behave, with grace, intelligence, and respect. And there was sincerity, justice. So people were good-hearted. And, there was no evil, basically. So it's interesting, what they refer to this age, that there were no law necessary because everybody was good and everybody was doing what they were supposed to do. So we refer to Saturn as the law, but in fact, is it? So the Golden Age is described as the first age, and everything was right, and there was peace, and there was no law, there was no fear, there was no punishment, and there were no swords, and there were no helmets, and no protection, and so we see that there's something actually very safe and very welcoming with Saturn. Through this third quadrant, we have to step outside our comfort zone and risk, taking risk in order to expand ourselves. And that's why, the third quadrant is a more adventurous quadrant. It's more expansive, from Libra to Scorpio to Sagittarius. We're pushing our boundaries, we're transforming ourselves, we're not settling for what we have. We develop a stronger will, appetite, and we want more of what life has to offer. So this tremendous growth in that third quadrant, which is, it's rooted in a deep feeling of insecurity and a deep feeling of not just insecurity, but deficiency. That's why there's a lot of crisis, in the third quadrant, because it's a place where we are prompted to change and grow. And then we reach, that last sign of Sagittarius and the ninth house, and we reach a certain maximum. That's where, that's why Jupiter is the great, generous benefic, because we've expanded to the best we can do. And then we reach the fourth quadrant, which is a quadrant that is the transpersonal quadrant. And this is where basically we shift from what we want to what we must do. So what does that mean psychologically, spiritually? From Aries to Sagittarius, first fire sign to the last fire sign, we are in command of our destiny. And then begins Saturn and Capricorn. And the fourth quadrant is exactly the opposite. That's when we realize that we are part of something much larger than ourselves, and that it's basically a place where we start to understand there is a greater order, and we cannot ignore it. We cannot change it. And it doesn't matter how much positive thinking and how much willpower you invest. It's not something that is up to your manipulation. It's very neutral. You enter a realm, a dimension in the fourth quadrant where your willpower is neutralized, because you enter a realm where everything is combined into a larger organism. So you start to see yourself in the perspective of something bigger, and you become, at first you can feel insignificant, because from a fourth quadrant perspective, you are replaceable. If you die, the life will continue. You don't matter that much. So there's a greater order, and you live, you die. Some people will remember you, some won't. You're a grain of sand in this vast universe. So basically, we see that the ego is humbled in that last quadrant. And it doesn't mean that the ego must be eliminated. However, that could happen. It's not something we want, but it's something that can be a shadow side of the fourth quadrant, is when we lose ourselves completely to a point where we become insignificant, and we become, we are taken advantage of, or we lose our confidence. And you can see people who are in this last quadrant, who forget what they want, who forget who they are. They don't know anything anymore. So what happens in the fourth quadrant, and it culminates with Pisces, which is the last and the most, the strongest sign of the last quadrant, is that you're more passive here. You're more responsive here. You're not in action mode. You are in listening mode, in adaptation mode. So the shift from the fourth quadrant from the third quadrant to the fourth quadrant is from that climax of I can do everything I want, Sagittarius, to I must adapt to a higher reality, a larger order. And we see that's why Saturn is often, not pleasant, because our ego is humbled and we don't have as much control and security, so to speak, as we would like to, especially coming from Jupiter. Now, if we look at Jupiter and Saturn, who are, hugging the MC and the fourth quadrant, it's that shift from the personal to the transpersonal. And that's where Jupiter is in Sagittarius is a transitional sign, because through Jupiter, we can get the most and we can be the king of our destinies, but we start to get in touch with a greater collective. It's a fire sign, which is very self-oriented, but it's a mutable sign, which has to do with something larger than myself, with the holistic principle are mutable. So there's a transition already in Sagittarius from the personal to the transpersonal. But Saturn is really the beginning of, it's not up to you, darling. Shut up and listen. Comply, accept, align. So, it's that feeling that we need to take a step back and we need to realize our own, our own limitation. Now, what's the purpose? Why do we need to go through that? Because, and when we realize that we are part of a larger organism, of something bigger than ourselves, we really learn a lot. And we become, more connected to the higher truth, not just our subjective truth, but a larger truth that is even beyond time, which resides in the last house and sign of Pisces, which is the ultimate, what is always true everywhere. It doesn't matter what culture, it doesn't matter what time, it's always going to be true. So that's where we touch eternity. If you live in the ideal world of the Titans, in the Golden Age, there is no such thing as wrong. So you never make mistakes and there's no law. But in our world of choice and free will, the laws are basically representing the truth. They are the keepers of the truth. And the only thing that works is the truth. So by feeling guilty, you can rectify your behavior. I hurt you, I'm sorry. Forgiveness is actually a very Saturnian gesture. And the ability to take responsibility and repent and make amends, which is very much responding to the laws of karma. Now, if you don't, and you have some people who are psychopaths or who are just living with so many blind spots that they never feel that they do anything wrong. They always feel justified. Life teaches them at some point it won't work. Simply, it's just natural. It's not because I'm idealistic. It's part of the mechanism. Just like killing everybody will work and you'll get your frustration out until you're alone on the planet. That's the thing, is you see the result with Saturn with delay. Saturn doesn't work with immediate gratification. It works with longer term results. This is why it's an Earth archetype. An Earth archetype have to do with sustainability. So right now, you know, we take from the earth and we abuse our resources, and we feel good about it because we have swimming pools and we can fly wherever we want, and we can have, so much food available and waste it because, we feel like it, because, we're spoiled. So we don't see yet the consequences. We are in that immediate gratification mode, and it feels good for now. So from a Saturn point of view, we may feel like we're doing the right thing because we feel so good. But Saturn measures things over time. And the Saturn cycle is 29 and a half years. It has a 7-year marker, 7.5-year marker. Square, opposition, last square. So ages 7, ages 14, age 21, age 28 are very important karmic years of accountability. So we become accountable for our actions. And that's why when we have Saturn transits, we either get rewards, we get the promotion, we get a new job, or we get demotion. We lose the job and we lose our position and our privileges. And that's not something that is just, governed by humans. It's part of a natural order of life. If you exercise, you're going to feel healthier. It's not up to you. It's just natural law. Now, with natural laws, there's human law. And human laws are just the result of humans trying to find out what works and what doesn't based on the spiritual laws. So the human laws are constantly trying to merge the gap and try to establish systems that will be aligned with spiritual laws. And there's a constant negotiation there. What is right? What is wrong? What works? What doesn't? And so we have our Bible and the 10 Commandments as a beginning of what is right and wrong. And each, sacred book, scripture, will have some references and guidelines about what is right. So our whole culture is based on spiritual understanding of rights and wrong that are translated into laws, governmental laws, as well as just societal laws and spiritual laws. So what happens is the human laws are never going to match the spiritual laws. We can only try to get better, but because our consciousness is limited and we need to constantly evolve, our laws also need to evolve and try to get closer to higher truth. So we make up all kinds of regulations, and we have our own definition of what's right and wrong. And part of it is, don't cheat and don't lie and don't kill. But it's also, what men should do, what women should do, what is appreciated and what is not. And you have a whole cultural, that's where culture and societies are building their own laws based on their own experience of what the truth is. And so you live in a conservative society, the law is that you're 13, we're going to find you a husband or a wife, and you're going to have children, and you're going to, the wife is going to stay at home and the husband's going to work and provide. And so that's an order that's expected in some cultures. And there's no free will, and if you challenge those laws, you're going to be a bad person. But are these laws really the truth? Should we get married at puberty when we become fertile and not even choose our partners? Well, some will argue that this way marriage lasted longer. Go back to that ideal of Saturn. When you didn't rebel, everything was peaceful. But the problem is that there's a difference between spiritual laws that are always good for you and always natural, and you will always be empowered by the natural laws of life, versus the human laws, which are kind of a lesser version, a more limited version. And so that's why we need to rebel against the laws, because the laws from a human perspective are only as good as the consciousness of the people who are deciding them and legislating them. And this is why Saturn can also reflect the misuse of the laws, and thinking that human laws are the final truth. And so wherever we have our Saturn in our chart, we are in constant negotiation between, the human laws and the spiritual laws. And we're trying to find how to reconcile them, how to bring them together. Now, this is an interesting case which, we talk about man-made laws versus spiritual laws and how that works. So this is a very conservative politician, Wes Goodman, who was advocating very fiercely for family values and anti-gay agenda, and all the bathroom regulation for transgender. Basically, someone who, from a man-made law point of view, Venus in Capricorn tells us how we should be in relationships. And Venus in Capricorn, from a man-made law point of view, man should be doing this and woman should be doing that, and there's an order that you have to follow. And then Saturn is conjunct Mars. Mars has to do with your sexuality. It's in Scorpio. And that Mars is basically under the governance and the regulations and the conditioning of Saturn that says that's what you ought to do the right thing. So he's conditioned that way. But what happens is when you have Saturn aspects or planets in Capricorn, you will have that dichotomy between what is really right and what is really wrong. There's what the priests tell me and what my parents tell me and what the government tells me, but is it really spiritually wrong? So you see that with that Mars Saturn, he was in the 9th house, very self-righteous about imposing forcefully, Mars using force to impose his values and his vision and his perception of rights and wrong. And at the same time, he has sexual attraction to men, and it's so strong that he cannot control himself. And what happens is that the more you repress something, the more it controls you. So Saturn, because of that play between natural law and man-made law, will have you always test from the forbidden. We tend to think in astrology that Uranus is the kinky one, and it will, Uranus will want to do things that are out of the box, or Jupiter, we want to do things that are extravagant. But the reality is, when you have very strong Saturnian aspects, you are tempted to touch the forbidden fruits, forbidden, quote unquote, by your culture, by your peers. So when you have such a tight Saturn Mars or Saturn Venus, there's going to be a temptation to cross the boundaries, because life is going to put you in a position where you have to test your rights and wrong. And here, it's obviously related to what is the right way of being in a relationship, Venus in Capricorn, and what's the right way to express your sexuality, Mars Saturn in Scorpio. So it was so out of control that he was harassing men. He was making advances, behind the scene, and sending pictures of himself, through whatever. So you see that there's the facade, the persona of what I'm supposed to be doing, and the need to force myself to be the good boy and the good Christian, and to be this politician who does the right thing. Go back to the golden age. I want to be an example. I want to be a role model. And then the natural law, he cannot suppress his own nature and his own sexual indulgences. And he ends up having sex in his own office. That's how bad it got, that he lost perspective. Like, he couldn't even do it in a private place. He had to do it in the office. And he's caught with his pants down. With obviously Mars Saturn, you're going to be humiliated. You're going to be reprimanded. And of course, he's the shame of the whole Christian movement. But he also resigned because he was a liar and he was a hypocrite. So that's a lesson about, why is that person experiencing that, is to redefine what is really right and what is really wrong, and to basically question my own morality. And that's another one of these, double standard people. This is another person, and a senator in Oklahoma who was the campaign manager for the Trump administration, who is caught by cops in a motel with an underage boy that he paid. So soliciting prostitution, blah, 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 and gay. And of course, he's a fierce anti-gay politician that votes against every regulation to support gay rights. Once again, Venus in Capricorn, the same degree actually as this guy. Venus in Capricorn conjunct the nodes, and another Mars-Saturn conjunction. So he's caught again between the conditioning of his upbringing and a more spiritual approach to rights and wrong. Now, these two folks can have a very, different reaction. Will they feel guilty because they violated their man-made laws, and they will feel like they need to go to a conversion therapy and stop being gay, because that could happen? Will they feel like they sinned, not because they lied, but because they were gay? Those of you who have not signed up yet, maybe this inspires you to commit. So go to the website. You can do that over there. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.